So you originally trained at LAMDA.
I did, yeah.
And you worked as an actor across theatre, film, television and radio. So everything, basically.
What I would describe as probably a normal actor's CV, and that you know, whatever job's next.
Yeah, exactly. But a good all-rounder, definitely. You're also a writer, and you've written Mrs. Hudson's Diary alongside your dad, comedy legend Barry Cryer. And you were nominated for an Inside Soap Award this year for your role in Hollyoaks.
I was.
For Glenn Donovan,
Yeah.
which a lot of people will recognise you from, I think. So.
Yeah, of all the things I've done, that's the thing I get most recognised for. I mean, it's still fairly recent. I've only just left the screen.
October, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And you kind of died, apparently.
That's right. No one's ever safe from death, even on Hollyoaks.
You'll be back. I get 6 months?
Yeah.
A year, maybe?
Maybe just, reconstructive surgery and, get rid of the poison from the system.
Yeah, totally. So let's start with the kind of, the soap world and life as an actor in soaps. So what actually was it like in Hollyoaks, kind
of? My experience of the soap world was probably similar to a lot of actors of my age. I've almost got the bingo card. I've not done Emmerdale, and I've not done Casualty, but I've done all of the others.
You've done all of them, haven't you, pretty much?
And that would be, 2 or 3 days on each show, sometimes just an afternoon. And so you don't really get a sense of the kind of the underbelly of a soap, being a foot soldier on a soap where you're there every single day, 7 till 7, sometimes 6 days a week. I would happily hold my hand up and say I was definitely a soap snob going into that. It was always something you did to pay the mortgage, because then I can go off and, I can go off and do theatre and be, be a serious actor. But until you actually become a fully paid up member, regular cast of a soap, you get to realise how brilliant these people are, how hard they work, how passionate they are about what they do. Because every writer, everyone in the camera department, everyone in publicity, probably started in the same way. There's a there's a screenplay in the bottom drawer, or the camera operators are saying, well, let me tell you about the feature that I want to make. But they've all come to a lot of people have moved their entire lives to become part of these tribes. Yeah. Whether you're in the Northwest dominates because you've got Corrie and you've got Emmerdale.
It's shot in Liverpool,
It's shot in Liverpool, set in a fictional village near Chester.
Yeah.
But my personal experience was just falling in love with the crew and the actors that have been on the show for a long time, and how brilliantly realistic they are about their place in the show business firmament. I did expect to join a group of people who had touching distance to reality in terms of the perception you get from the tabloid press about the kind of gilded cage that the soap world is, which is not true at all. It's bloody hard work, and I'm so grateful for it, because at the grand old age of 45, to learn a new skill, which is regular TV, one take often. If there's anything technically wrong with the shot, then sure, you'll go again. But if it's a clean take, that's you done.
Really? So what's the average kind of takes that you do? Like 2 or 3?
Oh, less. I mean,
really? Literally one take wonders?
Yeah,
is that?
Yeah,
oh my God.
Yeah. So once you get your head around that and know that you've got to be on it, and really you tip your hat to the actors that have been doing it for that long and are delivering every single day. Up to, I mean, I was hugely lucky. It doesn't always happen when you're on a permanent contract with the show, is that I filmed over 100 episodes in a year, which when you break that down to, if you've got one of the A storylines, then you're 3, 4, 5 scenes per episode. So that's 500 scenes where you've got 500 takes. You're having to hit your mark and deliver the performance that they want. Now, I'll freely admit that didn't always happen. Certainly not early on.
You had a lot of intense scenes though as well, and
Well, it was a nasty piece of work, and he was also being very nasty to one of the most popular characters on the show. So they had to, because she this is Grace Black, for those of you at home, the wonderful Tamara Wall, who's become a very good friend, was the kind of the sexy, independent, hard-hitting gangster female on the show, preeminent, that they decided she met her match in the guy who's actually her stepfather. So that's another element to the soap world, that all of the planning you do, when you're creating a character, goes out the window in as much as that kind of nuance. When you go, but hold on, these storylines are so bizarre, you then have to trust your instinct for telling the story, rather than trying to explain some kind of crazy, backstory and subplots and everything else that goes in there.
How do you prepare for something like that? Because, I presume you're getting your script quite late as well.
Yeah, and you're often getting changes in the makeup chair at, 6:30 in the morning. That gives you an advantage in a way, because you play what's on the surface and you play what's in front of you, which, in my experience of certainly in recorded media and in filmmaking, that's your better instinct usually anyway. Is not to try and contextualize, when things are shot out of sequence. They're obviously not in soap. I mean, you're shooting out of sequence scene-wise, but in terms of the episode, over the course of a couple of blocks, you're not going to be too far away from the immediate responsibilities of that story. So first thought, best thought, and they're kind of not likening it to improvisation or jazz or something like that, but where you go, okay, that's my choice. It's probably the best training you can have for preparing for auditions, because then there'll be a lot of half-formed ideas given to you that the writer and the director and the producer don't know exactly what they want going into which is, there's a little insider secret for you. We all know that working in this industry, especially at the casting stage, sometimes not everyone is in full control of the finished product, and you aren't ever, even when you show it to an audience. So when you scroll that back to what I'm saying about sitting in a makeup chair with your changes and having to accept them and make them work, it's a really useful skill to develop. Now, it doesn't mean to say that you abandon all sense of reality. That's going back to what I was saying about the hard-working nature of the people on the show, is they're working hard because they are constantly papering over the cracks, and I mean that in a good way. It's impossible to turn out 5 shows a week over a whole year and not have things slip between your fingers. But it's about learning to stay on the balls of your feet and maintain that energy and maintain that passion that is so impressive.
And so you must be pretty good at learning lines, because there's no time, is there?
No.
You read it, you've got to take it in and go.
Some of the people who've been on the show since the beginning, there are not many of them, but there's quite a few people who've been on the show for 9-10 years. I mean, they are literally there at the line run going, and what's that? Again, just picking up sort of fag ends of memory and everything else that they can grasp. But when it comes to the first take, absolutely on it. I'm not saying they don't prepare or they don't learn their lines. Sometimes they're so busy that they're not able to. Or weather changes, somebody's ill, they've brought some scenes forward that you were expecting to be filming the next week, and they've shoved it on that day, that afternoon. So that's another really useful muscle to develop, is that it's amazing what the memory can do under extreme stress, so that in fallow times, when you're out of work, when you're preparing for auditions, you are responsible for creating that pressure for yourself. And whether that's internal, a psychological pressure about where you want to be in your career, or it's external and you develop techniques to get the heart rate pumping and the adrenaline up. Albeit a superficial memory, I will say that. I wouldn't prepare for theatre that way, where you need an ingrained sort of deep knowledge of the text and the depth of a character. But certainly, as a first read, I'm streets ahead of where I was a year ago.
Does it take you a little while to kind of accept that, you're not... Does Does it feel like you're not able to give it your full though because you're not able to like prepare massively for it, or do you kind of accept that's
define
the style
full,
of it?
really. I mean, I think there's sometimes too much made of being well researched and prepared for something that sometimes should be instinctive and should be about the energy in the room at that time that you can't prepare for until, you know, even with actors that you know well or you've done scenes with before, every moment is new for those people. So in a way, until you get to that, you know, until you're turning over, there's still a percentage that you can't prepare for. So I would certainly salute it in terms of being full in that experience, because it's pretty raw and it's pretty pressurized, and that's a full experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. And how are you working with directors? Are they literally kind of blocking out scenes, or are you having quite a good chat with them before you do your takes?
It's tough on a soap because, I mean, you're meeting so many directors very, very quickly.
Yeah, because there's a lot of directors involved, isn't there? Is it one per kind of...
A block, yeah.
Yeah.
So you block a 5 episodes, which you'll film over 5 or 6 weeks. So if you're heavy on that storyline, then great, you will get to build up a relationship. But obviously, if your storyline is heavy and with a new director and they haven't had the arc, they'll have the story Bible and they'll have quite a long lead up of preparation with the writers and the producers to get up to speed. But there's still gaps in knowledge that you have to bring to them.
Yeah.
And also decisions that you have to fight for, because it is primarily story driven. So obviously by its nature, and you are in service of that. As I would maintain as an actor, you should be in service to the story as much as possible, if not all the time. You know, if in doubt, your thoughts should be, what way can I tell the story best, rather than fighting for your character or fighting for your ego. But with directors on the show, they are trying to reinvent the wheel a little bit each time, and you get a lot of young directors come in and go, well, you know, I've got my shot on this soap, and I'm gonna change the game a bit. And I think it's a bit like politics. You know, you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. When you get on the set of a soap, things move with a rhythm, because these men and women have been working on this show for a long time. They know the lines to draw on the floor. They know the shot plan before you do. So be prepared to learn their language first, rather than trying to impose your, you know, because there's only so much you can do within, you know, certain parameters, whether it's budgetary parameters or whether it's the parameters of trying to tell dialogue-heavy expositional storylines in an artful way that doesn't let the art intrude, because the soap fans won't forgive you for abandoning that. Something may look pretty, and on Hollyoaks, by and large, actually, the kit they're using is pretty swanky and up to date, and they're able to do things that other soaps can't do, in the sense that it's single camera, not multi-camera, and you know, when you really, you know, multi-camera, you are fixed to certain, to certain points of view. Whereas you can, you know, they've got a fair amount of location stuff goes on as well. So I described it with I was talking to one of the other actors on the show, who said it's like an indie soap. So you can step outside of the usual storytelling techniques of other soaps, and also because the viewership is kind of a smaller but hardcore group, they appreciate being, you know, entertained in that way, because that's part of the badge of being a Hollyoaks fan, is about these sort of quirky ways of telling. So we're more fantastical. We're able to do a lot more CGI stuff as well, and it's a more inventively technical show on that basis. However, that said, it's still a soap, and there are ground rules you have to hit. So in terms of my relationship with directors, it's finding those little extra flourishes and nuances that you want to get the character of the director without sacrificing the character of your character, and but you know, still hitting your marks, doing your one take, making sure that these lines come out as naturally as possible. So it's quite a transient relationship, not one that you have in other kinds of TV and theatre.
It's been physically tiring and mentally tiring to work so long days and to be under that pressure to do it and for one take, or do you just kind of get used to it and kind of relax into it quite quickly?
Yeah, there are some monster days, and certainly that I didn't have that many night shoots, but there were guys, in burning buildings and being rained on and things like that, at 4 o'clock in the morning, and having to do, with the right amount of turnaround, then coming in late afternoon to start filming on another block. So there's that kind of thing, but it's still the element of, you do remind yourself, you're not at the coalface, you're not on a minimum wage, you're not working as hard as the crew. So if ever you're feeling tired, just have a look at the people who were there half an hour before you were and will be there half an hour after you leave, if indeed you stay a whole day. Because, with mentioning no names, I've seen some actors rubbing their eyes at lunchtime and going, I've got one more scene and then, man, I'm done. Really? Your camera operator's been doing this all day, every day for the last, for the whole of the block. So that's a useful kick up the backside when you're feeling a bit precious, perhaps.
Yeah.
It is as hard as you will work as an actor, I would say, outside of special examples on film shoots where 6 to 9 months worth of heavy technical effect or location stuff that's problematic, but they're individual circumstances. But in terms of a regular job, it's about as hard as your work.
Yeah. I don't think the crew get enough credit, do they?
No. And I will sit here now and be, evangelical about that, because I think it's really the bedrock of the TV industry. That when we lament the passing of rep theatre as a form of training for actors, the soap is what we have now for regular, if you're lucky, income, work, training, experience. And so keep your eyes and ears open to the crew. Listen to the way they talk about the industry. It'll keep young actors grounded, but also it'll give you some really hard and fast shortcuts to producing good performances on a quick turnaround. Your first AD is like the sort of marriage guidance counsellor on a set.
I like that.
And so they're often the place that, they're certainly the place the producer should go to if they want to understand why something isn't working or why something is working, and go straight to your first. But also for young actors, go to the first AD and sort of say who on this set has been around the longest or knows the show best, and they'll direct you to that if it's not indeed the first themselves, because they've got a great objective. It's their job to objectively stand outside the process and be able to see where it's where the energy's dipping, or where maybe your actors aren't quite in sync, because the director's probably head in a shot list or talking a lot with the DOP. So it's useful then to find a sort of friendly voice or a friendly ear to have a conversation with, and so I'd advise young actors to do that, definitely.
I think actors sort of come into it and you think you're going to be this sort of, the main person on set, and you're really not. You're such a team. Everyone, it really is a cog in that wheel, in that machine, and making it work. And you have to do your bit and just your bit really well, don't you? I
think it's probably more useful to think of it like a relay race, to know when your moment is to put the kick in.
Yeah.
When they've called cut and you're preparing to turn around and have someone else's shot, then you've got to be willing, that actor, if it's just talking about actors, to deliver the best performance that they can. And part of that is, making sure you're there for your eye lines, making sure you're listening to the way the crew and the director are setting up that reverse, and that why it's happening.
Yeah.
So, but when it's your take, everyone there is doing the same thing. They're all willing you to give the best performance, and so you then take the baton in your close-ups and say, well, okay, I'm going to give you my all, because then that's restoring the faith that people are giving you. So
Works both ways.
yeah. So when when a director is addressing the heads of department of the line run and telling everyone how the shots are going to work for that scene, give them as much support as possible, because an actor that's kind of checking their phone or sort of drifting off into the corner of the room and not showing an interest, I mean, on a very human level, you're not going to get a lot back when it's your turn. Yeah. So it's a team game in that way too, even if it's just about survival.
Survival, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
You mentioned about the story Bible, and I've sort of known about this. When you're preparing for the role before you've actually started, presumably you get all the kind of story Bibles, because this is, I mean, they can be really, really thick. It's all, it is like novels about what's going on and the characters, and they, so everyone can kind of read up and be, so that's going to help you with your kind of just getting the script the night before.
Yeah, on Hollyoaks they're available, but they're mainly for writers, for storylining, because I think it's you can sometimes overload actors with that kind of detail. Family trees help. That's a good place to start. You have when I joined the show, and it's the same with every regular character, you have a character round table with writers and producers to give, and that's another piece of advice I would give. If you're in this situation where you're on a long running show, and maybe you've got a 2-year contract, and you think, well, I've got a long time to ease myself into it. Well, you don't.
No.
That's the first thing to say. You need to be prepared going into day one, because in many respects, once you've done that prep work with behind the scenes, you're kind of on your own to develop, outside of check-ins from the exec and chats with other producers and things like that, where they can sort of maybe realign recalibrate your compass a bit, but that's your chance to ask questions. I guess it's like any job when you're there discussing your contract, which is what you're doing, and the view ahead. That first meeting is so important that you get to know everything you can about the character, and they'll refer to the story Bible when you ask those questions. The ones that have full access to them and know they know their way around them. But it's up to you at that point as well to be a bit of captain of your own ship. I mean, there's a great quote by William Blake, the poet and painter, who said that if you don't become the victim of someone else's plan. Be the create your own plan, create your own pathway in life, because then that's quite a binary option in creative industries. If you're not guarding your own process, you'll become the victim of someone else's process. Yeah. Not saying victim's quite a harsh word, but you become subjugated to. So don't be reflexive in your decision making early on. Have an idea of what you want to do with that character, and use every single day, because that's a real luxury, to be able to work on the same character over the course of a year. You'll be thrown all kinds of curveballs and storyline changes and character changes too. I mean, that's the other thing about it's not just directors passing through that vessel of a show, it's writers too, who will then sometimes not be so up to speed with story Bibles that they will start to invent new little sort of developments for characters that may sneak under the radar, and an alert actor will say, this isn't right, this is 6 years ago this happened, and that this character wouldn't, and certainly don't leave it until you're on the floor discussing things. You get your scripts, you'll certainly get your shooting scripts before you get to the final draft, about 4 weeks beforehand. So ask the questions then.
That's longer than I expected.
Yeah. So you get an idea of where a character's going. Doesn't mean to say that
scenes
there
are
won't.
Completely different.
But so you get the rough outline of things. So in answer to your question about story Bibles, that can seem ominous, and an actor can maybe feel like you are then enthralled to another process. You're not. You've got command over it, even if it's someone else's idea of where an A to B for a character is. there's a hell of a lot of fruit to be got by you as an actor to know what's going on between A and B for you to explore. And you say, I'm interested in exploring these colours in it, then be in command of that early on.
I'm curious, did you do any kind of research into your character and the type of character? Because you are such a lovely, warm character, and Glenn is obviously very opposite to you, and you speak differently, and you hold yourself very differently, and that is quite instinctive as an actor to do those things. But I just wondered if you did any kind of specific research into, those types of people.
Very kind of you to notice the difference. but at the same time, that's kind of all the characters we want to play are the ones as far away from ourselves as possible. So I trusted in that. And going back to what I was saying before about not overloading an actor with things, I think if you're doing a play where you've got a 90-minute, 120-minute journey with a character, then you are researching all of those arcs, and you're making sure that you've got them covered. And so in rehearsals that you're then able to mine that research and whatever. With a soap where things are a bit more linear, trust your instincts, trust the people you've met, that kind of research, because new bits of it, because a lot of information is withheld from you on a soap as well, for good reason. It's embargoed because one of the greatest weapons of a soap in terms of its audience is surprise. Not to come over all Monty Python and say our chief weapons are, but the moments, those gasp moments when audiences go, I didn't see that coming. Actors will be part of that process too. Is that for obvious reasons, with social media being what it is, the leaking of information is incredibly damaging to a soap sort of brand. So you can't prepare too much for certain changes. They'll advise you if you are, in terms of research, and Hollyoaks in particular is really good at this. They'll put you in touch with charities if your storyline is
quite sensitive,
issue-based, issue-driven, and they'll be campaigning. They're quite. I mean, I did during my time on the show, we did a mental health awareness campaign, as I'm happy to say a lot of not just TV shows are doing, but the arts generally and society at large is now. I think it's fully embedded that this is a modern concern. It's an age-old problem, but it's a modern issue to tackle. And although my character's storyline wasn't specifically involved in mental health, you could argue he's a very good example as a character of a man of a certain age who's so ridiculously out of touch with his own emotional intelligence. There's that. But there are other characters on the show for whom that was a big part of their preparation for the role. They'd sit down with mental health, like Richard Linnell plays Alfie. He had a storyline where he had a schizophrenic. Not just episode. I mean, it was ongoing that he had this voice in his head, and to see that the way that played out was so sensitively handled. It couldn't have happened unless the actor was fully in command of the message that the charity he was working with had given him, and it was fantastic, and it did win a couple of awards, that one of those particular episodes, but also that storyline. And one thing I will salute Hollyoaks for is getting that kind of stuff right. And I was very well supported in the kind of gaslighting element of Glenn and Grace's relationship, and we did talk at great length, Tamara and I, about how this wasn't going to play out as just an abusive relationship that becomes, well, it certainly wasn't. One of the most powerful elements for it was it wasn't physical. and it was always about the threat or the perceived threat from her about what he would
Psychological.
do. Psychological,
Yeah.
So I had to. The kind of research for that was learned whilst we were filming rather than in advance, because I knew to an extent that Glenn was going to go in and shake things up as this family man who had a past and had a dark past in terms of his the relationships he'd had with his son's girlfriend, and they'd had a child together. And that was all really I knew. I didn't know that it was then going to become an abusive relationship. So you had to, the research we did had to be about the relationship between us as actors. So we had to develop, a sort of a shorthand very, very quickly between the two of us about making it as realistic and as deep as possible. So that again is about being instinctive and being, present.
Yeah, totally. You mentioned awards. Now, you were up for an Inside Soap Award, weren't you?
I was, yes.
For Best Bad Boy.
Yeah.
That's cool.
It was very cool. Yeah, I'm sad to say I didn't make the final four, but,
Totally
to get a pat on your back.
Yeah.
Having only been on the show for 6 months when when the awards were announced, was brilliant, because that's my job, was to be the bad boy.
Yeah.
So it was done well enough that you can be put in the same bracket as as people who've been on other soaps for a lot longer and have already won awards for those characters too. Was brilliant. I was chuffed.
You're doing your job well. Yeah, very good.
It actually doesn't quite compete with the reaction from the fans, though. I'll say that in a way, a lot of these awards are voted for by fans, but it's just the general fan reaction. So I'm delighted to say that maybe the greatest accolade I could have is just the way people would confront me on Twitter and about my character.
Yeah, how was that?
Well, it's nothing I can say here, and in terms of the abuse that he got. Yeah, I mean, quite inventive too. In fact, but when I left the show in my final week, I circulated a little video I put together on the WhatsApp group that the cast have about some of my favourite mean tweets. And it was just a litany of abuse that I was really chuffed to have received, because it meant you were doing the job right.
Well, this is it. In some ways, it's good, but in other ways, you must take it a little bit personally if it's on your personal feed, to kind of, because sometimes the audience doesn't see the difference.
If I was just starting out in the industry, I think I might have done. I've been doing it long enough that this is for the teenagers out there, but I was acting before social media was even around. So when I was leaving drama school, I think my wife and I got a mobile phone that we shared. It's that kind of thing. Yeah. And it was almost the days of you were waiting by the phone still, because battery life was appalling.
The landline, yeah.
And it was saying, well, I can't go too far. Well, in the sort of 60s and 70s, it was people sitting in pubs in Soho with pagers. So we've come a long way since then, that you get this immediate kind of reaction from the fans. So I think I would have taken it more personally, if I was younger, because there's an obvious part of being a fan of a soap is that you blur the lines between actor and character. So people were saying things like, how can you do this to this character? How can you, Bob Cryer, you are and you wouldn't, I wouldn't even go out of my way to explain the difference, because I think then you come across as a bit sort of prissy and a bit precious.
Maybe.
You sort of go, that's all part of the deal. If you're going to put yourself in the shop window in a soap, it doesn't make necessarily any of the criticism justified, but then that's also a lesson that being in my mid-40s, getting this kind of exposure is useful, having 20 odd years of acting up until that point, you shouldn't really read the good ones either, or take notice of those. I mean, that's always a good piece of advice, isn't it? Don't read reviews unless it's something that a director will read and see is a kind of a tap on the shoulder for them, and then bring it to your attention. But you should certainly wait for trusted friends and colleagues to maybe mention something. But if you're just voraciously poring over that stuff, only bad things can happen to your performance and to your self-esteem as a result of it. So you've got to keep a private sense of self, that's bulletproof.
That it must be hard though. You have a family, you have children, your friends, and they see what's going up there as well. So it must be, like you say, you've had 20 years dealing with this, and you can get your head around it easier. But
my kids haven't.
Yeah. Has that been difficult at all, or?
Maybe on another kind of soap, perhaps. Yeah. Hollyoaks is so obviously, and I mean this in the nicest way, there's fantastical elements to it. It's a little more aspirational in the way that its characters are, profiled, and it's a very easy sort of partner for kind of fashion magazines, and it's a little glossier. It's certainly in the last 10 years has taken its lead from the Aussie soaps, and how there's just a little more of a step in the fantastical direction, and it becomes more cartoonish in some ways. As I said, that's not to say it's not underpinned by a great campaigning, issue-driven set of storylines as well. But you're reaching your audience in a different way by doing both. You're able to sell things more easily, but you're also able to get important messages across at the same time. So I was very aware that my kids were never going to look at what I was doing on Hollyoaks as something that was ever going to be mistaken for who I am as a person, or who I am as their father. But you'd have to ask them. But so far as I know, in terms of having teenage daughters, and that's quite a large part of the Hollyoaks audience is in their demographic. Their friends have been pretty kind to them. They think it's kind of cool. Their dad's on a on a soap like that, with that kind of demographic, with that kind of profile that is a little more glossy and aspirational and a bit sexier than maybe some of the other soaps. It doesn't make a virtue of its kind of misery, which has become quite a debate in certainly the sort of the bleak off going on between Emmerdale and EastEnders and Corrie, at times, that has turned on a load of fans, but turned off a lot of the more traditional ones as well. So Hollyoaks exists in this world that can be more playful with its audience, I think, rather than not be a slave to that. So I was always pleased that the characters were always that bit larger than life, that it would never become a problem. I mean, I know I've had friends who've worked on EastEnders and Corrie in longer, longer issue-driven storylines, where, including one particular friend who was involved in the Bethany Platt grooming storyline, who, they get whatever I thought I was getting from certain, this wasn't being slapped in a supermarket in the middle of, that wasn't him, that was another actor I knew who, got confronted regularly in the street because his character was a rapist. So, I mean, that was, the public wanted to mete out their own justice. And when you're dealing with, in the old days, it was 16, 17 million people watching with a population of 60 million. Now we're at 67, 68, and Hollyoaks has got 1 or 2 hardcore, million hardcore fans. Then it's a slightly different ratio. That
there's still a lot for TV now, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Still a lot for
no, definitely. And I know that the other soaps have sort of lost numbers where Hollyoaks hasn't. So I think that's one thing they pride themselves on, is they look after their fans well, and they make the access for the fans quite easy, which has its perils. But I'm happy to sit here and report that they're a lovely bunch. Really, you're all very kind to me.
Oh, good. And what kind of opportunities have come up from Hollyoaks? Are you doing a calendar?
Oh, the calendar. Yeah. I've heard tell of the calendar. Yeah, in the good old bad old days. Yeah.
Do you think that there's a chance you might get kind of typecast and be up for more roles of that kind of nature, or not? Because you've obviously just done your radio play with your dad, which is very, very different to this.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I hope by doing things like that, it goes to prove that you're there's a longevity to a career, because you want to say that your acting isn't defined by that one role. But I don't know. It's actually a bit too early for me to tell. I mean, I'm only a month out of the character leaving the screen, and a couple more months after that of actually leaving it as an actor from when we filmed it. So I don't know the answer to that yet.
Yeah.
Typecasting is one of those things that, well, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? A lot of people do very well out of it.
Yeah.
And if it's playing bad boys on soaps, great. Or if it's an edge to your CV that wasn't there before, then it's a welcome bit of typecasting. So I'd welcome that, certainly. But I don't really know where it'll lead. And that's, in a way, that's another one of the benefits of having this opportunity to come to me when I'm a bit older, and you're grateful for the work, but you're also grateful for what for that exposure too. So I'm quite happy to be typecast for a bit from now on out. It's
fun character.
Yeah. So obviously you hope not, but then as a younger actor, say, you do have this belief that you can play every character under the sun. And I think one of the realities, and actually one of the best lessons you learn, is to know your hit. As a director I work with in Canada, used to say, is like, if you can get inside that, and if my hit is murderous builders, and you've got someone buried in the concrete out the back, then great, because they're a lot of fun to play. Up until that point, it was sort of bent coppers and things like that. So I was slightly on the other side of the line, playing more establishment figures. So this is a chance to play someone who's very definitely a bad guy. So actually that kind of typecasting will probably take me away from the type of roles I've been playing up to this point anyway. So
Good.
We'll see. Yeah.
Good. Can you tell me a little bit about your radio play? Because you originally wrote the book, so Mrs. Hudson's Diaries, with your dad, and then you turned it into a play.
Yeah.
And now you've done the radio play for BBC Four. And it sounds great. It sounds like it's coming out soon, isn't it?
It's on this Sunday.
Is it? Amazing.
Well, I mean, obviously, depending on when this goes out and when people are watching this, you can still probably get it on catch up.
Yeah. Because it's Sherlock Holmes's landlady, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's a sort of a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern concept of, the noise is off. The stories that people know, they're 130 years old now, these stories of Conan Doyle. And everyone knows or thinks they know the Mrs. Hudson from the Sherlock Holmes adaptations we've had over the years. And usually she's a sort of a fussing housekeeper, which if you read the Conan Doyle books, you realise quite early on that this is quite an incredible woman. She's a landlady, not a housekeeper, and that's the difference. She's got an income to derive from these tenants. So Dad and I, when I was a kid, bonded over the Sherlock Holmes stories, and I'd helped my dad write a book of anecdotes that his publisher had got a ghostwriter in to write, but there was this, because it was personal anecdotes and it was about family life as well. They decided it'd be good to get someone a bit closer to Dad to sort of unearth that stuff. But my dad's not very comfortable with autobiography, which is why he'd had people come in to help, because he doesn't like the long form. He's a joke writer and a sketch writer, so he loves short form writing, whereas I love structure and I love long form writing. And I came in to give him an excuse to take the piss out of himself, really, which is what he wants to do most of the time as it is. He doesn't need any help from me, although I'll happily oblige. Is that we came up with this series of footnotes to his own sort of autobiographical story, which was an editor that didn't quite get what he was talking about. So he would then sort of self-referentially go, oh, this guy's talking rubbish, or, you know, who's Barry Cryer, you know, to say this. So we sort of started to fictionalize his factual life. And so sat with the publisher and said, well, do you want to do another book? Because obviously we weren't going to do another book about Dad. And we said, well, the thing that we bonded over most when I was a kid was Sherlock Holmes. So why don't we look at an aspect of Sherlock Holmes that, you know, isn't talked about that much? And started to think, well, Mrs. Hudson, what's the story there? And she must have been there for all of the stories, and was right up until 1914, when he retires to Sussex to go and look after his bees, that she finally bids farewell. There's 30 years worth, give or take, of a relationship between Holmes and Mrs. Hudson. So there's a rich, you know, vein of seeing a side to Holmes as well as to her that we hadn't seen before. So we thought, well, the diary form would probably work best, and had a lot of fun, because we contextualised it well for my dad too, because I could say, okay, so we're going to be doing 1897 now, and I want you to take December. So you come up with sort of 12 or 13 little sort of sketches for her to be doing. And I said, these are the stories that probably would have been going on around then, the Conan Doyle stories. So we had a lot of fun doing that, and a lot of...
Yeah, you did.
You know,
Did you record it all together?
Yeah.
Yeah, thought I'd seen that, yeah.
Yeah. But because my dad, his profile is mainly in radio, it made sense that eventually this was going to have a life on radio. But it took a while from, 2012, I think, we published the book. And through putting it on stage at Wilton's Music Hall, we did it as a Christmas show there, to then Radio 4 coming in, a few years after. That was 2014. So a couple of years after that, we started talking 2016. And so now here we are, end of 2018, we finally, it takes that long. It's a good, I think the first chat was 2010. So we're now 8 years down the line, where I think she's in her natural home. And man alive, if 90% of great storytelling, in terms of recorded media, but also theatre and everything like that is in casting. We've got Patricia Hodge and Miriam Margolyes to play Mrs. Hudson and her great friend. So we had an absolute ball. Yeah, so it made it very easy. With that, they're just fantastic. And Dad's in it, I'm in it, and a few of our friends too. Along the way.
That's not work.
Yeah, well, but it's, the overnight sort of success element in this whole industry is littered with tales of 10-year, 10-year stories of things that seem like they've only just happened. But no, I'm happy to say it's a pet project, which is now in its natural home on Radio 4, for a couple of episodes, and then we'll see after that. So
TV show?
A company has optioned it. The tone is very different, because you have to serve the medium faithfully, and I think on radio it's more like the diaries we wrote, whereas the option and the treatment that we've created for the TV version is very much more a dramatic take on that world. So with Dad's following on Radio 4, it's much more of a knockabout, upfront, theatre style sitcom stage show, whereas the treatment for the TV version is kind of more of a as if Mike Leigh had a half an eye on a bit more of a slow burn element of life in the kitchen at 221B, with maybe a bit more social conscience as well, because on TV you've got a slightly broader church to speak to. And I think going back to my first point about Mrs. Hudson as a character, here she is in the 1880s as an independent small business owner, as a woman. That to take that story forward is as interesting as all of the Holmes-related daring do and adventures. I think it's a fascinating period in terms of female emancipation as well. So, not saying she's a proto-feminist, but we dip our toe in that water as two men writing it. But as the father of girls, maybe I go somewhere towards evening the score a bit, to say that she's responsible for as much of the enjoyment of that world as Holmes is, let's say. So
There must be a lot of stories there. There must be so much kind of material as well.
well, we're very conscious not to make it Mrs. Hudson the detective, even though fans of Sherlock Holmes will obviously demand a certain element of that. It's more of a satirizing of his character. So maybe sticking a pin in his balloon of his pomposity a bit, because he can be a bit of a bit full of himself. So we like to have Mrs. Hudson, and specifically the friend of hers that we've created, who's Miriam Margolyes, plays her brilliantly on radio, and you can only imagine what an actor like Miriam Margolyes is going to bring to this very sort of loose-lipped, very raucous character. She owns a set of rooms at 197 Baker Street called Hannah Brayley, and so she's there to sort of take Mrs. Hudson out for a pint and take her to the music hall to loosen things up a bit. So I think that's a side to the Victorian bawdiness that isn't always there in Conan Doyle, and it can be quite po-faced at times. That I think one of the licenses we were given by the Mark Gatiss, Stephen Moffat, I should be so bold to say we inhabit the same universe. They created a side to Watson, especially, and Mrs. Hudson, that was obviously, because it was set in the contemporary universe, gave them a chance to speak to the wider Holmes community as being a bit more unbuttoned at the collar and a bit more relaxed, and so we benefited from that sort of tailwind, as it were. So I'm looking forward to getting people's reaction to that side of Holmes, because it's Holmes below stairs. He's not on call. He's not conducting his business. He's in the larder looking for a missing cat when we comes into contact with our Mrs. Hudson. So it's he's helping out with cases that ordinarily we wouldn't have seen, that Conan Doyle wouldn't have written about, or Dr. Watson wouldn't have written about, which is the conceit with him. So.
Oh, good. So what is next for you? Is there anything kind of on your radar, or do you think the TV kind of might go somewhere, or is there anything in the pipeline?
Nothing in the pipeline at the moment. I've just finished the second treatment of the TV version of Mrs. Hudson, so we'll see where that takes. And I very early on, because my dad's a writer as well, had written and always wanted to. So whenever you finish an acting project, I always play this game with myself, and you go, if you've got a split discipline life like I have, and a lot of creatives do anyway, because it's just the nature of the beast. Like yourself, you perform, you produce, you present, you write, all of these things, mainly because you have to. If you finish the project as an actor, I always say to myself, well, I'm just a writer, really. So, and whenever I'm writing and things are getting tough, I go, well, I'm an actor, really. So it's that kind of balance. So I'm having now finished a year's worth of solid TV work.
You deserve a rest.
Well, no, I can't afford a rest, but at the same time, it's nice to know that you can throw yourself into another discipline, because it just keeps the energy going. Because it is one of the great things about what you're doing with this service and this facility is it's such a psychological battle, acting and writing and working in any aspect of this industry, that you have to find hooks and triggers for yourself to get yourself out of what can be an inevitable slump into, well, I'm never going to work again, or this is the constant ticking clock that we all face. That you have to find ways of keeping yourself positive, and that's a mental health struggle that a lot of creatives have, and it can get the better of lots of people, and has done with friends of mine, and so it's about becoming bulletproof again. It's creating techniques which are external but also internal techniques, the way lots of people do in every aspect and every career. The sort of and whether that's to do with nurturing a life outside of the industry, but it's also creating a space for you within it, which is a safe place to play, because that's why we're here. We're here to play and explore and be curious about the world and translate that for, you know, for people looking from the outside in to our industry and providing entertainment, but also, you know, informative, educational, rich, creative stories for us to learn about ourselves. So but you have to create a private space for yourself to keep that, you know, to keep that solid. And for me, that's writing and creating new projects that don't involve performing. But now I'm at the age I am, I try and create projects where, you know, initially when I started writing, it was to write stuff for myself as well. You know, seize the means of production. If there aren't roles out there, write them.
Yes. I think that's the thing, isn't it? You know, it's really important to be proactive and to go out there and make your own work.
It's no guarantee they're going to come off.
No, but it's practice, and it's, you know, it's a creative output, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's be curious about the world, but also be curious about your industry.
Yeah.
If you can learn other people's jobs, doesn't mean say you want to do them.
Yeah.
You can learn about production, you know, about filmmaking, about how it's put together. It'll make you a more empathetic soul.
Yeah.
And hopefully that will make you, on a very superficial level, it'll get you through a lot of conversations on set that will make your life easier. And if you're comfortable around other people because you understand what they're doing, you'll hopefully deliver a better performance yourself.
Yeah.
Because
I've got a last question for you, which I'm asking everybody.
Yeah.
What do you think makes a great actor?
I think I've just touched on it. I think
you have,
curiosity.
Yeah.
And at all levels, like I say, it's not just about the character in front of you. It's about life in general. Be a voracious consumer of life, you know, within limits, obviously, because there are people who take that advice and destroy themselves, but it's, you know, within safe boundaries. But it's a piece of advice I give to a lot of actors out of drama school, is be a voracious consumer of your own industry. So be a better audience member. Go and see shows. Go and see films and watch television that are outside of your usual choice. Don't be a passive consumer of your own industry. Push yourself into other areas. You know, read outside of pleasure. You know, read screenplays, read plays, and understand how they're put together, and understand how the industry works from that side. But also, if you're being a better consumer, you're being a supporter. You're being a financial supporter of your friend's theatre company or your friend's short film or just the industry generally. You're putting something back in, and by doing that and being with a sort of benignly critical eye to things, is not being the one in the bar afterwards slagging everything off, but understanding the choices that other people have made in your industry. That all stems from curiosity, and so it's curiosity about yourself. And so both internal and external journeys that you go on when creating a character will come from the way that you live your life outside of that. Don't just be an evangelist for your own faith, if that's what you call it, you know, in acting. So you don't just leave the church and then leave your morals behind you. Leave the theatre, leave, the cinema, and put the book down, and then be constantly curious about that with other people who are outside of the industry, but also be a sponge to people outside the industry to help that fuel the way that you're able to put something back into it, because ultimately it is an industry built on collaboration.
Yeah.
And the way that we communicate with each other is by supporting. So
good.
Do that. Be curious, be supportive. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Amazing. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much, Rob. Yeah, it's a pleasure to see you, and thank you so much for coming on.
You're very welcome.